All right. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar on buyer enablement, the self-serve buying opportunity. Excited to be doing this CMO Roundtable with some of my friends in the CMO world. Excited to have many of you joining us live. Excited to make this as interactive as we can as we go. So you're going to notice that we're going to make this very casual, very conversational. I got a bunch of topics I want us to cover. We're going to try to get to some hot takes as we can as well. But I want to hear from many of you. So if you have a comment as we go, would love to be able to reference that. If you have a question for our panelists, would love to hear that as well. And I'll make sure we get that in. We got a packed agenda for the next 45, 50 minutes, but super excited to be here. So we'll quickly let our panelists introduce themselves, who they are, where they're from, and then we're going to dive right into this. So Betty, why don't we start with you?
Sure. It's great to be here, Matt. Thank you. I am Betty Mock, head of marketing at Consensus, formerly at Pendo, LinkedIn, and Intuit. I currently lead marketing for Consensus. And a little bit about us, according to Gartner, the number one thing that someone wants to see when they come to your website is a product demo. And what we do is solving for that by providing interactive demos that give the buyers what they're looking for. And it basically helps your product sell itself. So it's what we see as the next generation of product-led selling to appeal to this new antisocial buyer, which is what made this topic near and dear to my heart today.
So a year ago, Gartner's doing research on this all the time. A year ago, they said 61% of buyers prefer a rep-free buying experience. Just a year later, I think it's at 67%. So it continues. Two-thirds of your buyers, if they left to their own devices, would prefer to do it on their own. That doesn't mean we're not involved. It just means a different way of going to market there. So excited to talk more about that. Leslie.
Hi, everybody. I am Leslie Alore. Until last week, I was the CMO at Flexera, and before that, Ivanti, both companies that were customers of Consensus. So I have a point of view as a customer, but I will say not the person who went through the buyer experience. So I have some thoughts on that, and I'm really glad we're talking to some marketers about Consensus today. And I am an antisocial buyer, so I'm very excited to talk about this topic.
There are so many things we've ranted about this before, Leslie and Gina, we have as well, that there's so many things that have been owned by IT on the tech stack where like it just if you want to create a buyer friendly experience, if you want to create less friction for your buyers and customers, like marketing has to be involved, if not driving that conversation and decision. So Gina, thank you for joining us on this webinar today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Hortatsos. I'm currently the head of growth at DefenseStorm, which is a cybersecurity risk management for financial institutions. Spent time as head of marketing for HackerOne, Highland, slew of other companies. I'm excited to be here today. I think that when I was looking at the topic, I was excited to join in because as a head of marketing who actually grew up on the demand creation field marketing side, I feel like I've had this conversation for decades and trying to convince organizations to think about the buyer before they think about what they want the buyer to do, think about what the buyer needs. So excited to tackle some of these topics today.
We talk too often by default about sales stages, and that usually is how we want to sell. But
Mhm.
that doesn't matter if it doesn't align with the way the buyer wants to buy. We don't get to decide that. We don't get to choose that, but that is the laws of physics for how what's happening in the market. There's data that I've seen, consensus betting. I've seen it from your research. I've seen it from Cunningham forgetting his first name all of a sudden. Help me out,
Terry,
guys. What's Carrie?
Terry.
Thank you. Good Lord.
Mhm.
I've seen this forever, right? That the majority of the buying process is done before sellers tend to get involved. According to, I think, some consensus data was that 80% of decision making happens before the sellers enter the room. 94% of buying groups rank their preferred vendors before first contact with sales, and they buy from their favorites 77% of the time. So if we're still stuck in this concept of sales enablement, then we're really just sort of like we're optimizing a process that sounds like there's friction and it's a conflict with what buyers are already doing. So I think it's smart for us to think about this shift from sales enablement to buying enablement, and I'd love to unpack what that actually means. So, Betty, what does that mean when I say buyer enablement? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. And those stats that you provided, those are Gartner stats. Those are third-party research stats.
Right.
And those numbers are growing because in the advent of answer engines or LLMs, people are doing much more research in the dark where you don't have exposure to that, any of that data and that experience. And so they're making their own decisions, and it's harder and harder to influence them. And largely it's because we see the experience as largely seller led. It's set up by funnel stage, by the technology that is sold to us that creates those silos between us, the SDR team, the AE team, and each stage in the funnel. And we don't historically have kind of like constituted that to think about, well, what does the buyer want? And who wants to wait 7 days or 9 days for your AE to be ready to have a meeting or to see the product? They want to see the product now. And so time and time again, we see this happen. A lot of seller experiences or sales experiences in B2B are creating those steps of friction, and it's what's frankly losing deals. And I think that's the companies that are more progressive and thinking buyer first that are really winning right now. And look, SaaS is a bloodbath right now. Like, it is hard out there. And so you need every advantage you can get. And being more buyer led is a way to win in this changing economy. It's what we see in the conversations we have with great partners like Flexera.
So, all right. So, Leslie, if I say the phrase buyer first, like I think some sales teams get a little worried about that, right? Because I think a lot of sales teams want to have control of the conversation. You got to kind of put that aside and say, to have control, you have to give up control. To have confidence from your buyers and have preference, you have to really, in some cases, let them lead the way. What does that look like in practice? How have you applied that at Flexera and elsewhere? And what are some of the gaps that people need to be aware of?
Well, first, I want to talk about how we're actually contradicting ourselves all the time with that, because we say we want to be buyer led. I think most people recognize the fact that this idea of the linear stages is a fallacy nowadays. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the sales enablement and sales methodologies, like the force management methodology, the challenger methodology, there are many. They actually are all about retaining control and doing things like not giving a demo in the first conversation, right? Because you're trying to sell bigger. So you need to ask all the questions. You need to understand what are the outcomes, what's the value. It's the right motivation. To understand what the buyer really needs so that they don't come to the wrong conclusion without getting the full picture is the right motivation. But the reality is that in today's technology, we're ignoring the fact that they did all the things in advance. So great marketing teams make all of that material frictionlessly available so that people can navigate and find the answers that they want. And that means the answers that they're going to go seek out from others if you don't give it to them. So you mentioned Carrie Cunningham. One very interesting conversation we had in a CMO coffee talk probably 2 years ago that has stuck in my head is tell your tell your buyer about your competitors also. Give them the short list, and that lets you to kind of take control of what is said about the short list. And so you're doing as much as you can to tee up the conversation so that people are already in the right mindset by the time they get on the phone with the seller.
All right, I don't necessarily want to ask the same question to all three of you, but I am very interested in Gina's perspective on this as well, because Gina has been in cybersecurity for a long time, currently CMO at DefenseStorm. If I could use one word to describe the cybersecurity buyer, it'd probably be cranky. So, like, when you've got a cranky buyer that doesn't believe anybody and doesn't give anybody the benefit of the doubt,
Yeah.
buyer enablement is like twice, 3 times as important, right?
Yeah. In every company I join, one of my first questions is, do we have a customer journey artifact that I can look at to understand what our understanding is of that customer journey? And almost inevitably, it's a deck that has a set of like a table on it where the columns are the phases and the rows are the what happens in those phases. And almost always there is a row for what we do. And very seldom is there a row that talks about what their information needs are and their buying needs are. So I think that we start with, to Leslie's point, the fallacy of like, we know what we want them to think and see and do, but we're actually not flipping it on the side and saying, what are their information needs? And I think with the cybersecurity crew in particular, they are skeptics they do not want to be sold to. They lean even more heavily, I think, on their peer group and on their network to just like shortcut their buying process to say, hey, we market to heavily regulated industries. So they have regulatory burdens and examiners come in and make sure they're doing all their stuff. And then they come back and say, you guys need to go buy this thing. And then they pivot to their peer group, the dark funnel, the rooms that we are never in, to find out which things they should look at and to establish preference. So we don't have control over most of that. And one of my problems with all of these sales methodologies is that it depends upon us having a dialogue, being able to ask questions and receive insights, what they're willing to tell us. 80% of the purchase journey is done. They don't actually want the dialogue by the time they get to us because they've already done other things that we don't control. So what can we control? We can control customer proof points. We can control, mobilizing our own customer base, the happy ones, to be ready and willing and able to say, company X is the one I use, and they're actually pretty good. I wouldn't be embarrassed to recommend them.
Well, and if you think this is hard, it's going to get worse in a minute because we're going to talk about the buying group, the buying committee, and all these other people, right? Where we need to try to sort of have that conversation. And it's not just those individual conversations, but the consensus building, right? The group commitment to change is hard enough, when we're trying to sort of wrangle that ourselves. I did want to bring up, I think, there's a lot of complexity here, and sometimes it's better to say, like, where is a place where we constantly are falling down. Betty, you guys talk about this deep C framework, and deep C, it's an acronym, so it's discover, engage, equip, pursue, coach. I like this framework. I like all of those elements. What's one of those do you think that a lot of orgs constantly either get wrong or don't do well?
I think that the piece that organizations I'm actually going to go out of the framework or like out of the scope of marketing, talk a little bit about the key point in the process where we see with stakeholders is sort of like this idea of consultative selling. So in this, we've talked a lot about buyers doing their own research. They are more equipped today than they've ever been. They're going to G2, they're going to Reddit, they're going to their own circle and doing their own research. So the buyer today comes pre-educated in a way that they have never been before. And so this changes the dynamic for us as marketers and salespeople to be consultative in that process and to really be a partner to the buyer and help solve for their needs and progress them on the journey. And you called out this idea, Leslie, of telling your competitor's story. Like the more you can speak to the full range of options available to them that they're already researching, the more you can be consultative in that journey. And so when you can be buyer-led in connecting the solutions to your buyer needs, that's how you progress the deal in the coach phase of that process. And what we've seen is that sellers that do that, they go the extra mile and they're able to context switch across the decision makers is when you're able to kind of maximize outcomes and in a lot of cases double conversion rates at the end of the funnel.
Love it. All right. I do want to shift to this buying committee concept, right? Because I think, when my dad sold Caterpillar tractors 30 years ago, he was able to follow a book. Literally, it was a book called Selling to Veto. Veto is an acronym, very important top officer. So you just go to like the top officer and try to sell that. That doesn't exist hardly anywhere, if anywhere anymore. When the Challenger sale first came out, I think Brent and team said it was like 5 to 6 members of the buying committee. We have clients doing enterprise sales where they have mapped a network of 30 plus members of the buying committee, or inside and outside of the organization, right? And so that matrix is real, that complexity is real. Understand and managing and enabling that is really important, because before someone can buy from you, they have to have a commitment to change internally, and that commitment is going to be consensus driven. So how do we do that well? Like, one of my favorite features actually of consensus, now we're not selling here, but like, is the ability to actually see who your champions are sending content and sharing content to. So you're sort of discovering who that company thinks is in the buying committee, and then you can sort of play that as well. Leslie and Gina, we've talked about this forever in Coffee Talk and elsewhere. Leslie, talk about what's been most effective for you in designing, discovering, and enabling that buying committee working in their own way?
So you have to, part one, you have to understand who those people are
Right.
and how they intersect, and who are the people who are your kind of yes sayer champions versus just your no sayer influencers. Because I think a lot of people think of influencers as who's going to influence the yes. More often, they're the ones who are really just more likely to swoop in and say no. And so, oftentimes in software, there's, the circle for users, the people who use your thing. There's the circle for the buyers, the people who buy it, and there's some intersection between those sometimes. But sometimes those who actually make the buying decisions aren't the everyday user. And then there's the influencers who, those might be procurement officers or finance people or the CMO, people who might intersect the buying group, but never intersect the user group. And you really have to understand those things and then figure out what role do they play in the process. Because what typically is going to happen is, let's talk about software and actually getting their hands on a product. The people who use a product and are going to influence being part of that buying committee, what they care most is all about their technical requirements, the experience of using the product. So something like Consensus is awesome because it lets them get their hands on it. They're usually the ones who are going to want to forward that to the buying decision maker and then they have to explain and defend themselves of why they want that. So when you're talking about enabling a buyer, you're really talking about enabling a champion to convince the others within their own organization as to why this is the choice they want to make and why it's going to deliver more value than it's going to cost.
And we're going to get to demo automation here in a little bit, but I think I want to double down on your concept of the champion. Gina, sometimes that champion is not Vito. Sometimes that champion is not the CMO, right? I mean, you guys have all three of you have probably your teams have been in deal cycles where someone says, if I could just get to Betty, I could make a case for this, right?
They think that, but I always send them away.
Yeah, no, you're disrupting the buying process.
Her, not me.
No, I mean, I'm a 10-person company, but if you've got anything back office related, I'm like, Lisa runs this stuff.
Yeah.
If you don't go to Lisa, you're not respecting her or me. So how do you identify that champion and knowing that we have this sort of buying committee map that we create kind of universally for our ICP in our target market, but how do you start to personalize that to the individuals and identify through actions who the champion is? Wow.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you have to depend on what they tell you. And I think what I've run into before, what my sellers have run into before is somebody that looks like a champion on paper, and they say all the things that give us no reason to believe that they're not the champion. But a champion is really a mobilizer. A champion is the one that can not only fight for their preferred vendor, but actually knows how to work the traps. Out of all the deals you compete in, through time and space, a big chunk of them are lost to no decision.
Yeah.
And it's not because you didn't compete well against your competitor. You probably didn't know that same champion or that same buying committee is actually looking at several different projects simultaneously. And as an executive, I don't know about you guys, but I always tell my team, we only have the appetite to ingest one new system every 6 months or something like that. You know what I mean? If you don't know, one test sometimes is to try to understand from the champion if there are other projects that are also being considered. And if that person really has no clue, that's a tell. If that person kind of understands that landscape or is willing to ask that question of their, executive leader or whatever, of if I were actually to run this project and bring you my recommendation, could I actually implement this project this year with 85+% certainty? That is also a tell. So when it comes to discovering that champion, I think that also taking into account the realization that the business that you're trying to, get into and sell to has other priorities that have nothing to do with you. And even a basic understanding of that landscape can be very helpful in figuring out what you need to do next.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, consensus is confidence in that decision-making process, right? Let's say there's just 5 key members of the decision-making group. If you've got 4 solid yeses and 1 soft no, the deal's still dead. because everyone's like, why is the soft no still not on this? I think Gartner has said that 74% of buying groups demonstrate unhealthy conflict internally, right? In terms of where they're prioritizing. Because like, especially with high consideration purchases that are like the stakes are high, the dollars
Yeah.
are high, like you're not just, we're not just proactively building consensus, we're fighting against that conflict. Betty, talk about how we need to better orchestrate our workflows and our priorities as sellers to support that confidence building internally.
I think of it as two things: collecting data and personalizing experiences.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I find that separates great selling motions from not great selling motions is how do you give the buyers what they're looking for and the surrounding buying organization what they need when they need it. And one of the best case studies that I saw is one of our large enterprise partners. They send personalized demos to the champion, and that champion distributes it to their buying group. And the ability to personalize that demo, select what's important to you, is a key part of what we see in a buyer first journey. Being able to receive a demo that basically says, this, and this is important to me, this is not important to me, and then out pops a personalized experience is what we have seen drive incredible results. Because what happens is then you get that data. The
Yeah.
CFO said, I'm interested in these three elements. I'm not interested in those three elements, but the head of marketing is interested in these three elements, and everybody gets their own experience. And the AE gets a report that says they watched for 5 minutes, they dropped off here, this is where they spent the most time. That's power that can accelerate the deal cycle. There's a great review on G2 where someone says they closed a $17 million deal in 30 days using automation. That knowledge can be power, and it really transforms the buyer experience because now you're working in the timeline of the buyer and when they want to consume information and the information they want to see. So I'm not trying to sell, I'm just trying to say that the more that we arm our marketers and sellers with information to advance the buying experience, that's going to drive data. And it happens in the front end too, like on your website. That information can be passed to your buying group early in the cycle, and that way you can pass that information to accelerate pipeline.
All right, Leslie, let's go deeper on this idea of product experience and demo automation. I want to give some stats that we've found. I mean, this is reality, right? Because I think this is a place where a lot of sellers are worried about losing control. I want to be on the demo. I want to do the demo. Only I can personalize it the way that they're going to want to see it. But here's the facts, right? Like the average time it takes from I want a demo till it actually happens is 14 days. If it's automated, it's zero. 50% of people that get that automated demo experience do it on the same day. 13% of them are doing it after hours. So they're doing it on their own time, right? And so it isn't just about the effectiveness, but it's also about velocity and
Yeah.
getting that deal further along. Talk about what that's meant for you, Leslie, and your experience with Consensus and just automating that demo and product experience in general.
Yeah, I have seen that even more people will use it after hours. That's kind of my experience, and my world for the last many years has been selling to IT buyers. And the thing about a lot of these IT buyers, we kind of joked about like I'm not an IT buyer, but I am an antisocial buyer. They're even more antisocial.
Yeah.
They don't want to be in a high pressure situation where they're being interrogated in order to be able to interact with the demo. They just want to see what the technology is all about. You really have to convince them before they're willing to have that conversation. I kind of liken it to, if I'm making an equivalent for marketers in the room, remember when we all used to gate our content? Like we expected people to believe that all of our thought leadership was going to be so amazing that they had to give up their value before we gave it to them. And then a lot of us were like, oh wait, let's actually, that is the thing that is going to convince them that we know what we're talking about. You give them that and then they want to talk to us. It's kind of the same principle with the demo and the self-guided experiences. But what is really next level, Betty talked about feeding salespeople those insights of what were people using to What were people using to personalize their demos? What if, amazing idea, you actually could use that as a trigger to do remarketing to those people so that your remarketing ads are really bespoke to one of the 12, each of the 12 people in that cycle? Or what if you actually were able to consume macro trends over time on what types of personas were most often interested in what things, and that could inform your upstream marketing more proactively. So there's so much you can do with this, and that's why when we started talking earlier today, I was like, I'm so glad we're talking about consensus to marketers because sales engineers have been gatekeeping this.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I think we have to go back to the basic psychology of what these buyers are going through.
yeah.
They are always trying to pattern recognize to continue to justify whether the pain of change is less than the pain of same. And so if you only give them one shot through a demo that's delivered by an SC who is going to go through their script, even if it's semi-personalized because they've researched the account and done discovery, the way it goes is they go through their thing, they maybe say the name of the company a couple of times and, point out a couple of different features that may have come up during discovery. And then they say, do you have any questions? Usually the answer is no, 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 we're good. Go ahead. Even the most technical buyers, if they could hit pause, if they could like replay what that person said a couple of times, just because their mental load is trying to pattern match all the time and trying to calibrate pain of same, pain of change. Is this pain of change better than the pain of change on the other vendor we're looking at? So this type of self-service experience, I think, removes a lot of the cognitive load and actually taps into that basic buyer psychology, which doesn't normally, that information need is almost always not fully met in that big, hour-long demo.
Well,
That's such a great point. Are we going to talk about AI, Matt? Because I feel like there's a conversation that Gina's point just unlocks.
23 minutes in and we haven't talked about AI at all. So I'm happy to go there. I do think the other dirty little secret or inconvenient truth about the fact when we do demos to people, especially if you're doing it in a virtual format, what percent of those people that are receiving that demo do you think are multitasking, right? They're listening or they got an alert over here. Oh, Slack just pinged. I should look at that. Oh, yeah, no, I got it. Just keep going.
Yeah, even if they're trying to pay attention.
Right. Versus if they're doing it on their own, they literally are doing it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I got so many angles we want to go on this, but let's do the AI side. Betty, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I loved what Gina said about the high pressure feeling of being in a demo and that moment where like, no, I don't have any questions. You guide me, but really you're not paying attention. And I think that that's where it is this interesting intersection that AI enters the picture from a buyer perspective. We've been talking a lot about, is the next generation of selling a chatbot, someone that you talk to, like type into, which really hasn't gotten much pickup? Is it conversation that you kind of have a conversation and ask it questions? Or is it someone who looks human but is AI and you're having a conversation with it? And there's so many ways that the market will go as buyers kind of emerge and decide what experience they want. But to your point about that high pressure sales experience, what we see is an opportunity for AI to come into the picture and for the buyer to guide that experience over time and say, I don't want to hear about that. Actually, I do want to hear about this, and tailor it really to my needs because I'm hearing your generic, spiel and tour, but I actually want something specific for me. And I think that's the vision that we see as an opportunity for agents to play that role for that deep personalization and that ability for that buyer to say, no, actually do this, and have it be more frictionless in that.
Well, there's how AI can interact with that. There's the fact that, you've got 90+% of your buyers are going to LLMs to do some of their research. How the LLMs reflect you and how they talk about you is important. I see some companies right on their homepage intentionally send people away from the homepage saying like, hey, go find out what Gemini thinks about us, right? And it's a pre-built prompt that allows them to go do discovery in a platform that has a high level of confidence already. So I think, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how you are implementing AI to create and enable that buying experience. One of the things I wanted to bring up is this, the opposite of confidence and maybe is sort of this lack of control. And we can talk about workflow, we can talk about platform, we can talk about features. Inherent in all this, Leslie, is sort of a change management and culture management component of how we go to market. Um, but when we enable the buyer to do some of this, we're taking some jobs to be done away from sales. And that has people react to that sometimes in a negative way, not because they think it's the wrong thing to do. They kind of start to worry about it. Do I still have a job, or is like AI going to just start doing all this for me? I think it's going to, especially for considered purchases, for high trust purchases, it's a balance. I would rather my sellers play those high touch, high trust engagements and let the technology enable everything else. But I'm curious, as you've implemented this, Leslie, in different organizations, how do you play that changing culture management card?
Yeah, so I think the point that was already made about the role of a seller becomes a consultant in the process, becomes a helper is exactly right. But by the way, this isn't new. This whole idea of technology and self-serve overtaking, you're displacing some sales roles. That's what PLM is kind of all about, right? But there enters a point in the system for certain more high stakes types of technology or services that you do need that human intervention. But the human isn't there to tell you everything you don't know. The human is there to say, what can I answer for you that you couldn't uncover on your own? Or what assumptions can I validate for you? Because really the whole buying process is about validating value, and a seller is there to be that validator, right? Let me give you absolute confidence because buyer's remorse is a real thing, and the salespeople absolutely can play a really compelling role in that when they're not having to be the one that starts from the beginning and lays it all out and says, let me tell you who we are and what we do and da 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 da, all the spiel nobody wants to listen to. They can just be like, you're very well educated about us. I know that you've seen all these things. What questions can I answer for you? How can I help you? How can I make your life easier through this process? What value, what outcomes are you looking to get that I can help you with?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen data that shows that the average B2B seller spends about 25% of their time actively selling, right? And you're never going to get that to 100%, but what if you could get it to 30? I mean, you think about the size of your sales team, that's enormous. And just like we see with marketers, because we talk about like, marketing adopting AI, and we talk about marketers getting scared about the impact AI is going to have on their jobs, but the teams that actually break down the jobs to be done get really excited about AI because they see how much it can just take the stuff off their plate. Literally, as we're doing this, I've got Claude doing a bunch of stuff that I would have to do manually later today, and it's just working on it while I'm here, right? So that's exciting for me as an entrepreneur. It's exciting for marketing teams. Gina, how do we help make sales teams and sales leaders get excited about the impact this can have?
Uh, we're going through our AI transformation right now, and I think that there is no secret. People are going to feel some kind of way.
Mhm.
Um, the more you get into use cases and more sophisticated you get into use cases of AI, you will probably have a moment where you realize that, like, gosh, this thing is way better than me at something I thought I was really good at, and that feels odd.
Mhm.
Um, Getting people comfortable with the technology, making it very clear that it's the expectation that this is used for productivity gains, making it kind of fun. We're
Yeah.
doing a Shark Tank like thing in a couple of weeks to promote different use cases. Um, and one thing that I find really interesting is that the way in which sellers are bringing to us, hey, we need to have a good AI story. When we dig into when they're talking to prospects,
Mhm.
um, there are many stripes to an AI story. Is the AI story that they're asking about a compliance one? Like, assure me that you won't train on my data. Is the AI story, hey, I want to know that you have AI capabilities in your product, which will actually make you a better vendor? Or is the AI story, I want to know that you're an AI first organization. So when my board asks me what vendors I'm working with, I can say I'm an AI first organization. So there's a lot of complexity and nuance to the phrase AI that sellers are grappling with, and they're learning along with everybody else. So I think that, digging in and being curious about what the nature is of these AI conversations, as well as being proactive and making sure that we're getting tools and enablement in their hands. People are running wild with all the general LLMs, and there's a lot more shadow IT going on.
Yeah.
We should be treating our use of AI tooling internally as a formal launch, just like you would onboard people who bought Salesforce, just like you would onboard people who, onboard any new system. You must also approach that with AI tooling.
Well, you've got, we've been talking about buying groups and building consensus among buying groups. Like you just described an internal buying group where they may not be buyers, but we need an adoption group. We need people that have alignment around what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so thinking of that in the same way, I remember back when account-based marketing became a thing and sales teams are like, what is this? We had to ABM ourselves before we could effectively execute an account-based strategy across our teams. So I think the message to me, the takeaway is like, think about your internal team the same way you would a buying team. Understand the champions, understand who may be the detractors, understand what is motivating them, and have those honest conversations to ensure they can see the benefit to the organization, to the department, and to them as well.
That also helps to create empathy with what their buyers are going through.
That's right. That's right. Betty, do you have a comment on that?
Did. So I love the direction that you took it in, Gina, because it's very much like there's buckets of AI investment and transformation strategy. One is efficiency and strategic elevation of your team's work, right? And that's largely internal. Your stakeholders will be finance because now your cost of acquisition or your efficiency has improved. What I also think about is a lot of testing with new tooling that can be game changers in your go-to-market model. And that's where I think the opportunity is to appeal to the antisocial buyer. Like, what tools do you leverage that put experiences in front of your buyer that elevates their buying experience, shortens the sales cycle, and accelerates your deals? And so I would encourage, like, I've been trying to think about, okay, how do I do both at the same time and make sure there's an exploration journey of like, what are the things that will solve for buyer experiences that will drive better quality leads to my sales team? And I'll highlight someone on my team. We hired someone that is sort of part web answer engine optimization, part web, part like AI expertise on our website. And he has been leveraging our product and other products to monitor traffic and drive conversions. Now, I think a lot of companies are seeing deceleration of web traffic because of answer engines and that are the changes in the research process. And so we have seen actually flattening, which I think is really good. But what we're trying to do is improve yield on our website we basically doubled the hand raisers on our website because we're delivering that buyer first experience. And that's the kind of testing that I think has been sort of a game changer for us in terms of not only delivering the same yield from the higher yield from the same number of visitors, but also driving higher quality conversations to our sales teams, which makes us kind of like the heroes in the equation in a very different market, in a very challenging market, I would say. So I think about it in those lenses.
So this sparks a thought for me, if you don't mind, Matt, if I jump in.
Please.
So I think the marketing teams that are going to win here are I talked a little bit earlier about reducing the friction in the process, but it's not about reducing the friction in the process for the one person. It's about making it super easy for that buying committee to rally around the answers and be influencing those answers by making them easily available by creating a great experience. So that. But it's not just the buyer has their mind kind of made up and they think they know. It's like the buying committee has rallied and they've kind of used your materials. A couple organizations do this really, really well. Sixth Sense is a great example of an organization that makes so many pieces of information available and tailored to different audiences. That like I'll read something that's clearly designed for a marketer, but then I will share something because I'm now trying to convince somebody who's running a, sales team, and I'll share a version for the CRO that's kind of like that lens of it. So like we had a whole party about this and a whole discussion and compared notes and interacted with things. Probably, I mean, Sixth Sense seems to know what everybody's doing all the time, but I want to say before we ever talk to them, they know those things. So really good marketing teams are going to create systems of interconnectivity and information, leveraging things like AI that makes it super easy. I'll give you an example, very specific example. I used ChatGPT to research a vacation destination. So we're not buying software now. We're buying a vacation destination, and I shared my chat with my sister and my brother-in-law and my friend because we were all planning on going. And I was like, jump into this conversation with me. Like, I don't know all the things you guys want. Like, that's the future.
Yeah, love that.
That's a great example. And I think that level of interactivity and building consensus is what makes this buyer enablement section of the RevTech stack so exciting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as we're getting a little close to sort of where we're going to need to wrap up here, I got one more section I want to get to. If anyone has any questions for our panel, I'm going to be watching the Q&A. Throw it in the Q&A. If you've got a question, I've got a few as well, but I'd like to prioritize yours if you're joining us live. So it took us 29 minutes, guys, to talk about AI, and shockingly, it's taking us 43 minutes to get to attribution. So let's talk about measuring. Yeah, I know, right? So let's talk about measuring buyer enablement. And Betty, what you said is sort of like it's changing what matters, right? Like it's going from sort of the vanity metric of the MQL to an actually authentically interested lead. It's the idea that like it may be okay for my web traffic to go down, right? Because of the nature of how people are searching. In fact, like those companies that are literally sending people away from their website have higher website abandon rates, but that's now a good thing for people that are interested. I'm gating part of that as well.
Yeah.
What are some of the trends you're seeing? And I guess this is a question for anybody. I want to start with you, Betty, of like what are people measuring and prioritizing to ensure that the right buyer enablement activities are prioritized?
Yeah. Well, now you all have said the two four-letter words in marketing, attribution and ungating. I feel like those are the words that like create a strong trigger. I think it's funny. One, I mean, it's the relationship you have with sales because there's no true attribution model that's going to satisfy everyone. And so I think of it as point in time, time over time, like, what is that year over year, month over month, quarter over quarter? That's kind of like defining your trend line. But what we see is focusing on quality by segment. So, what is the quality of the conversation and what is the yield that reps are getting? And what we've started to look at is sort of instead of MQLs, hand raisers or what we call demo views first, because I mean, these are leads that convert 8 to 12 times higher than a traditional content MQL. So we don't even look at our MQLs anymore. Hand raisers and demo views. Then it's meeting set and then pipeline. And like, what are we driving? And ultimately, we have optimized towards pipeline creation because that's all sales cares about. They're looking for that magic 2 to 4x coverage of their targets. And what can marketing do to get them there is the key question. And the more you can speak that same language of what marketing is delivering to help them get to that coverage level is what I think wins the case and helps you build trust with your sales partners. At least that's what I found success versus trying to go back and be like, that's marketing source, that's not marketing source. And at the MQL level, those are just not effective conversations that I've had recently. I think the things are changing around us.
Yeah. Well, and just like we've had this debate around sort of how we measure the funnel, right? Marketing source versus sales sourced, or hey, what's our conversion rate on our demo page or whatever? Like we could sit back and say, like, how many more people are getting into demos? How much longer are they spending in demos? How deeper are they going, and how much rich data do we get? I want to measure all of that. But just like our marketing funnels, our demand funnels, there's concentric circles of what I really care about. I care about all of that, but that impacts things like deal velocity. It impacts things like deal conversion. So Leslie, how are you balancing like the tactical improvements of engagement that
Yeah.
buyer enablement helps with, but also sort of having an eye towards the end result that you can buy a beer with?
Well, so Betty's totally right, and I would add two other facets to that, which then end up kind of closing those circles. So it's not good enough to just be creating the pipeline because the pipeline has to close into bookings. So, really looking at what are the attributes of organizations, of buyers, of behaviors that are leading to that actual booking, and where did they come from along the way? Like where did that come from? This is not about attributing dollar values to certain investments so much as it is understanding what were the things that led to the outcome that we want. And look, things like page conversions do matter if you're spending money to get them to that page, right? So there is an absolute, cost or ROI metric that you have to be looking at just to reckon with how much does it cost me to get to the outcomes that I want, and am I putting money in places that just simply don't matter? There is going to be an element that we all have to accept and understand of things we cannot measure, and to attempt to invent a number to attribute to everything you do just to give it a value. I think is a wasted exercise, and I think that's kind of what Betty was saying. But the coming back to your original question, what really matters? How do we find the balance? I think about it on three levels. The most important is the strategic outcome the business needs, which is revenue. The leading indicators to that revenue are going to be those hand raisers in that pipeline. And then there are tactical metrics that are the leading indicators to whether you're going to get to that pipeline to make sure that you're spending your money on the right things.
All right, I'm looking at the clock, and I want to make sure we get to 2 audience questions here, and I'm going to throw it out, and then whoever talks first, we're going to do this Family Feud style. Whoever hits the button first gets to sort of start on this. So I got one from, thank you, Ian, for following the rules and putting your question in the Q&A. It's not, you can do whatever you want, I don't care. But Ian's question is thoughts about looking at engagement at both the account and contact level to gauge true intent. Curious how you're doing that and how you think about that philosophically, as well as how you're operationalizing that.
I can speak to that. We do have a account-based strategy in my current role, and we bought all the tooling and implement all the processes to do that. I think there's huge value in account level engagement just to get that visibility, right? And one of the things that we measure as a leading indicator is engagement from, we've got a segment-based, very well thought out ICP and segment-based engagement goals at the account level, because you kind of have to start there. People are going to raise their hand when they're ready to raise their hand. And sometimes anonymized engagement is almost all you have. So I do think it's important if you have a way of understanding and enriching that data to understand who those contacts are, even better. But I do think that first you have to make yourself aware of which accounts are in the market to buy, and then you can figure out a way to warm them up. And then when they're ready to raise their hand, then you're cooking.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question from Polly here in the chat. We talked a little bit about gated and ungated content, and Leslie said it should have died a long time ago. I mean, we can agree on this. We can do jazz hands, but it's still very concerning to a lot of companies. A lot of companies are like, I want my form fills. I want to know who that is. And this whole conversation's been around buyer enablement versus seller enablement. This isn't about what you want the seller. We really got to prioritize the buyer relationship, because if you don't, your competitors will. The question from Polly says, AI killed it for good. I don't think AI killed it. I think the buyer experience has killed it. And whether you could respond to that buyer preference or not is up to you. But just curious, is AI accelerating that and accelerating the adoption of that from companies?
AI is the easiest excuse to tell your CEO who couldn't get over it before. And you're like, if you get your content, the LLMs can't train on it. You want the LLMs to find you. You want them to have your education. So really, it's a great excuse. So take advantage of it now. There's my quick commercial.
Exactly. Oh man, we hired too many people. We got over bloated. We didn't have a great product strategy. So let's do a riff and let's call it. Let's blame AI. Like, that's not happening anywhere either right now.
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate everyone engaging. So for Polly, Alex, Lisa, Ian, thank you guys for being here and engaging on this. If you're watching on demand, would love to hear from you as well. And whether you're here live or on demand, definitely take advantage of some of the resources that exist around this. There's a great, I've been referencing components of the Consensus B2B Buyer Behavior Report. Go consensus.com/research. You're going to find that. You'll find the Deep Sea Framework guides. Some really great stuff if you want to evangelize some of this to your audience or to your internal group. And we'll have this available in various formats after this session as well. Yeah, important conversation that we need to keep having because there's plenty of companies that are still kind of nervous about doing this. And I especially appreciate the three of you just sort of sharing real experiences about what's working and being honest about some of the tension even internally in the conversations that we have that sort of really are required to build our internal consensus to make these changes to impact our buyers effectively. So thank you everyone again for being here live. Thank you everyone for being part of this event. Have a great rest of your week and we'll see y'all next time. Take care.
You.
Thanks,
Bye.
Matt.